Hello, and welcome to Lesson 11 of Speed Puzzling 101 Tips and Tricks, quick speed puzzling lessons in under 10 minutes. Today's lesson is on whether or not you should do the border first. As a disclaimer, there is no single correct way to do a puzzle. My advice may work for some, and it may not work for others. I encourage you to try as many different approaches as possible and see what works for you. One thing that almost every puzzle has in common, regardless of brand, cut, color, style, is that they all have a border. Yes, there are a few unique exceptions, but they are not being used in speed puzzling, and let's hope it stays that way. To begin, there is almost no puzzle that requires you to start with the border. It is often the first step, as those pieces are easy to pull out of the pile. It helps you show the dimensions of the puzzle, and it creates some sort of structure for you to start building around. But again, there is no requirement that a border gets built first. Personally, I prefer to build a border in many cases, not all cases, but many cases, as a starting point because it helps me get organized at the very beginning. Again, those pieces are easy to pull out of the 500-piece pile, and it lets me work on something while I'm glancing at the box and learning the image a little bit. So when I go into the main part of the puzzle, I have some sort of understanding about what is going on already. Now, there are challenges to starting with the border. First of all, if you do not get all 86 pieces in a 500-piece standard puzzle, then you're going to be wasting some time. As you're building 4 straight lines with very little information, it's tough to know if you're missing a piece. So you're going to end up trying a bunch of wrong pieces and wasting time before you realize, oh, one of these pieces must still be in the larger puzzle piece pile. The second challenge is making sure you have enough space. In many competitions, space is very limited. So if you are trying to build the border, you are taking up a good chunk of your puzzle space to do so, meaning that other pieces, depending on the type of puzzle, other pieces are going to be overlapping with each other. Ravensburger puzzles, the standard 500-piece rectangles, are one of the easier puzzles when it comes to space and having enough to build the border and still have all the pieces out. While if you're on a circle Ravensburger puzzle, much more difficult. If you're using a brand that has large pieces, it's next to impossible to do the full border and have enough space for your pieces. So depending on the style, the brand or the cut that you are using, it may change whether or not you start with the border. And third, sometimes there is just nothing to really help you get through the border if you are working on solid colors or a pattern that's very hard to distinguish, like a field of grass or sky, a solid blue sky with no clouds or anything. Doing a border will be trickier, as you're just going to get into just trying different pieces to see if they fit, wasting a lot of time going through a grind process. So let's just go through a few examples of puzzles and decide if starting with the border makes sense or not. The first puzzle is Hello Vinyl. This is a classic busy puzzle. There's a lot going on, but when making the choice on if to build the edge or not, look at the variance in just the edge. Here we have a blue disc, the green can, the flower journal, and the lighter across the bottom. Along the top are the record sleeves, headphones, a zebra-style pattern, and some vinyl discs. Along each edge, there's also differentiation. Because things are different almost everywhere, building the edge is easier because you will definitely be able to see the general area that each edge piece goes. However, the blue disc at the bottom and the black records in the top right corner are trickier. However, their space is limited, so you're still fine. This is also a puzzle where you might start in the middle with random objects because, again, most sections are very distinct and different. There is no wrong choice here. Even puzzles that have been around a while could show up in a competition, apparently. So let's look at New York Postcard. Similar to Hello Vinyl, the border here is broken down into sections. The 2 different flowers on the bottom, along with the green dots, stand out. The pink dots down the left with the bird, easy to see. The green lines, purple splotch, and large red dots on the right also stand out. This is definitely a puzzle where building the border is simple and could be a good starting point. However, it is also just as easy to pull out pieces from each section after your initial flip. That purple flower is unique and that color stands out, so you may just build that entire corner first. Next, the green dots will also stand out, so pulling them and just doing them all at the start also makes sense before doing the rest of the border. Because the entire puzzle can be broken down into sections, an edge here is not required. Again, it can help with structure, but that's about it. The next puzzle is what gave me the idea for this video. I recently did a pairs competition where Porcelain Pups was the puzzle given. After winning the competition, the organizer asked why we chose not to do the edge at the start. Many of the other pairs had. I explained that while that is an option, the border is essentially the same all the way around. Yes, there are some small differences in the blue wooden shelf, but not enough to waste time on. Trial and error would play a big role, and you want to avoid that as much as possible when speedrunning a puzzle. My puzzle partner and I finished with a time of 34:15, and many of the others who chose to start with the border were barely done even that when we had finished. If the border looks like a grind, consider avoiding it until the end, or at least until you have more information. The sibling to Porcelain Pups is Cubby Cats and Succulents. Now, while the top has more of a pattern that you could use to build the edge, the bottom 2/3 is not very different. Again, you can try to grind through it, or, like Porcelain Pups, choose to wait until you have more information from the rest of the puzzle to put the edge on. Circle puzzles are already tough enough, so don't make them harder on yourself. First, we have the solid edge with puzzles like Pokeball, Rainbow Cake, and Donuts. All of these have an edge that has little to no difference between pieces. There is no proper place to start and relies almost exclusively on trial and error. If you attempt to start with the edge, it is likely you will not do well in the competition, and you will definitely not win. Second, we have a circle puzzle like mushrooms, desserts, and fruits and vegetables. There is a gradient to support you, but there is also a lot going on. So where a red piece or yellow piece might go is not as simple as it may look. There is less trial and error, but there is also something else to consider, which brings me to the next group of circles. The super clear gradients, like animals and mandala, the edges on these are the simplest. Each section is split, and working your way around the edge is pretty straightforward. So you may want to consider starting with it. But, as I mentioned, there is one other factor to consider, and specifically with circle puzzles, and it is space. Circle puzzles are massive, and while the edge is less than 70 pieces, about 20 fewer than the standard rectangle from Ravensburger, they take up so much more space. Therefore, it is not uncommon to try to work on all circle puzzles on a section-by-section basis, or start from the inner circle and work your way out. As you gain more space by using up pieces, putting the board together will be easier. However, if space is not an issue, go for the edge if you want. Landscapes are popular puzzles and can be a challenge. A puzzle like Farm in Sweden is tough. The sky is probably the easiest part, but still not super easy. If skies aren't your thing, then the bottom 80% of the border is just a field with plants and flowers. Now, it would be understandable if you said this would be too much trial and error and would waste time, similar to the Porcelain Pups. The difference here is that there is very little to go on within the puzzle itself. Looking at the border carefully, you'll be able to sort out the left and right side from the bottom and use the flower direction to put those pieces together. And the bottom will come together if you use the box to help guide you. Not doing the edge here will leave you with very little information to build off of, especially if you're doing this with a partner. On your own, you could start working from the top and work your way down before doing the edges near the bottom. It's an option. If there is one thing to take away from this video, it is that in no situation is the edge required to be done first. What it comes down to is your personal approach and strategy. As I mentioned, I prefer to start with the edge in most cases because it helps create structure and a clear starting point. But I can also identify puzzles where starting with the edge would be a challenge. It's going to slow me down and it's just going to be a grind to do it. So I know when to start in the middle and work my way out. Practice puzzles by putting them together without starting with the edge first to see how it works for you. I'll cover strategies and advice for how to do that in future episodes. That is it for lesson 11 of Speed Puzzling 101 Tips and Tricks. Make sure to click like if you enjoyed the video, leave a comment below if you have advice of your own or suggestions for future lessons. Make sure to click subscribe so you stay up to date with all the content on this channel. And coming up very soon on this channel is the release of another episode of Puzzled and Chatty. This will be episode 6, where I sit down with another speed puzzler and talk with them about their puzzling experiences. That is it for this video. I'll see you next week for another lesson. Class dismissed, and as always, happy puzzling. Bye.